55 million people walked through Dubai Mall last year. That number appears in every piece of promotional material the mall's operator, Emaar Properties, has published since 2023. 55 million. More visitors annually than France receives tourists, more foot traffic than any other mall on Earth, by a margin that its own marketing describes as definitive. And if you walk through Dubai Mall on a Thursday evening, the crowds confirm it. The atrium is dense. The queues at the aquarium are long. The ice rink below has spectators 3 rows deep at the railing. 55 million people is not a fabrication. But here is the question that number does not answer, and that Emaar has never been asked to answer in public. Of those 55 million visits, how many of them involved anyone actually buying anything? Because if you know where to look, and if you go at the right time, on a Tuesday morning or a Wednesday afternoon, away from the aquarium and the fountain and the Burj Khalifa view terrace, you will find something that does not appear in any press release. You will find corridors where the lights are on and the storefronts are dark, shuttered units behind temporary hoardings, printed with the mall's branding, which is the retail industry's standard method of making an empty unit look like a decision rather than a vacancy. You will find luxury brand outposts staffed by 2 people serving nobody, in spaces that cost more per square meter to rent than almost any retail address in the world, generating foot traffic that does not convert to transactions at the rate the model requires to sustain itself. Dubai Mall is not dying the way a patient dies. It is dying the way a business model dies, slowly, structurally, and with excellent lighting throughout. If you come here because you want the kind of analysis that goes past the headline number and into what the number is actually measuring, you already know what to do. Dubai Mall opened in November 2008. The timing is significant. The global financial crisis was 6 weeks old when the ribbon was cut. Lehman Brothers had been gone for 2 months. Property markets globally were in freefall. And Dubai, which had built its entire economic identity on the premise that growth was the default condition of the universe, opened the largest mall on Earth in the middle of the worst financial contraction in a generation. The audacity of that timing, whether it was genuine confidence or simply construction momentum that could not be stopped, set the tone for everything that followed. Dubai Mall was not built to serve an existing retail market. It was built to create one. The field of dreams logic applied to commercial real estate. Build it at sufficient scale, and the demand will materialize around it. For the first decade, that logic appeared to be working. The anchor strategy was conventional and aggressive. Emaar signed international luxury brands to long-term leases at terms that reflected the mall's position as the premier retail address in a city with no income tax and a growing population of high-net-worth residents and tourists. Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Cartier, Rolex, Tiffany. The Fashion Avenue extension, a dedicated luxury wing with its own architectural identity, positioned Dubai Mall not as a shopping center, but as a retail boulevard that happened to have a roof. The logic was sound. Dubai was attracting exactly the demographic that luxury brands needed: wealthy tourists with disposable income, expatriate professionals with high salaries and no dependents to support, and Gulf nationals for whom luxury retail is not a special occasion, but a routine transaction. For years, that demographic showed up and spent. The first sign that something was shifting came not from within the mall, but from a screen. Noon.com launched its UAE operations in 2017. Amazon had acquired Souk.com, the region's dominant e-commerce platform, the same year and rebranded it as Amazon.ae. Within 3 years, our e-commerce penetration in the UAE retail market had moved from a figure that luxury brands considered negligible to one that their regional directors were discussing in quarterly reviews. The shift was not uniform across categories. Groceries, electronics, and everyday consumables moved online fastest. Luxury goods held out longer, on the premise that the purchase experience, the physical ritual of the flagship store, the sales associate who knew your name, the branded packaging opened in front of you, was an irreducible part of what you were buying. That premise held in some categories and eroded in others, at a speed that varied by brand and by customer demographic. But the direction was consistent. By 2023, the UAE had one of the highest e-commerce adoption rates in the Middle East, and retail analysts covering the region were beginning to ask a question that nobody had needed to ask about Dubai Mall in its first decade. What is a physical store for if the transaction can happen on a phone? This is the question that has no comfortable answer for a mall whose business model is built on leasing floor space to brands that need that floor space to be generating returns that justify the rent. Stand in the Fashion Avenue wing on a weekday afternoon and count the sales associates relative to the customers. Not on a Friday. Not during the Dubai Shopping Festival, when the government effectively subsidizes foot traffic through promotional infrastructure that the mall does not provide on its own. On a regular Tuesday in February, the kind of day that represents the operational baseline of a retail business. The ratio you will find is not the ratio that a luxury brand's regional director would show their CFO if they were asked to justify the Dubai Mall lease renewal. The stores are staffed, the product is beautifully presented, the air conditioning is perfect, and the customer is somewhere else, looking at the same product on a phone, deciding whether the experience of buying it in the store is worth the drive, the parking, and the hour they will not get back. There is a harder number underneath the foot traffic figure. In 2023, Emaar Properties reported retail revenues from Dubai Mall operations that, when divided by the 55 million visits the company simultaneously reported, produce a revenue per visit figure that is, by the standards of any major retail center in London, Paris, or New York, remarkably low. This is not an accident of accounting. It is the mathematical consequence of a metric that counts everyone who enters the building, for any reason, as a retail visitor. The tourist who comes to photograph the fountain, the family who comes for the aquarium, the office worker who cuts through the ground floor as a shortcut to the metro, the teenager who uses the Wi-Fi. All of them are in the 55 million. None of them are necessarily buying anything from a fashion brand paying $600 per square meter in annual rent to be there. The model that Dubai Mall was built on assumed a conversion rate between presence and purchase that the current visitor demographic does not deliver at the volume required. And Emaar knows this, because Emaar's response to the last 5 years has been a systematic and largely unannounced restructuring of what Dubai Mall actually is. Look at where the capital has gone since 2018. Not into new luxury retail space, into food and beverage, into entertainment anchors, into the VR park, the ice rink expansion, the cinema complex, the aquarium upgrade, into the kind of experiences that cannot be replicated on a phone, that require physical presence by definition, and that generate dwell time even when they do not generate retail transactions. The Dubai Mall that Emaar is building toward is not a retail mall with entertainment amenities. It is an entertainment destination with retail tenants. Those two things are not the same business. They have different economics, different lease structures, different anchor dependencies, and a different relationship with the brands that currently occupy the Fashion Avenue wing on terms that were negotiated when the first model was the only model on offer. Have you ever noticed that the most photographed parts of Dubai Mall, the fountain, the aquarium, the dinosaur skeleton in the atrium, are all free? That the thing the 55 million people came to see does not require them to open their wallets? Mohammed Al-Abar, the chairman of Emaar Properties, has described Dubai Mall publicly and consistently as more than a mall. He has used the word destination in almost every major interview about the property since 2019. Destination is doing significant work in that framing. A mall is a place you go to shop. A destination is a place you go because the place itself is the product. The shift from one to the other is not a failure of retail. It is an acknowledgement that the original model has a ceiling that the current environment has made visible. But the brands occupying the retail floors did not sign leases for a destination. They signed leases for a mall, and the distinction matters enormously when lease renewal conversations begin. A luxury brand that is paying Fashion Avenue rents and generating Fashion Avenue footfall that does not convert at Fashion Avenue rates has a straightforward decision to make when its lease expires. The decision involves the question of whether the brand's presence in Dubai Mall is a retail investment or a marketing investment, whether the store is there to sell product or to be seen in the address. For some brands, the answer is clearly the latter, and those brands will renew regardless of per square meter productivity, because the Dubai Mall logo in their real estate portfolio signals something about global positioning that is worth the cost of the lease. For other brands, particularly the mid-luxury tier that occupies the corridors away from the flagship addresses, the calculation is less favorable. And it is in those corridors, away from the anchor addresses, that the hoardings have been appearing with increasing frequency, behind which the lights are off and nothing is being sold to anyone. The structural problem is not the vacancy itself. Retail vacancy cycles. Brands enter and exit addresses constantly, and it is not inherently significant. The structural problem is what fills the vacancy when it occurs. If a mid-luxury brand exits a Fashion Avenue unit and is replaced by an F&B operator or an experiential concept, MR captures the dwell time but loses the lease rate that the retail model was built on. If the unit stays dark behind a hoarding for 6 months, 12 months, longer, the signal it sends to adjacent tenants about the health of their own lease terms is not a signal MR wants transmitted. Commercial real estate is a confidence industry. The moment tenants begin to read the vacancy rate as a structural condition rather than a transitional one, the negotiating dynamic of every renewal conversation in the building changes simultaneously. This is where Dubai Mall is in 2026, not dying in any catastrophic sense. The aquarium is full, the fountain show runs on schedule, the 55 million number, or whatever it is actually measuring, will appear in next year's annual report. But underneath the number, in the lease agreements of the mid-tier retail corridor, in the revenue per visit mathematics that MR does not publish, in the e-commerce adoption curve of the UAE consumer demographic that Dubai Mall depends on to remain a retail address rather than a tourist attraction, something is moving. Slowly, structurally, in the direction that nobody in a position of financial interest in this building has an incentive to describe clearly. The mall that was built to be impossible to ignore is learning what every retail address eventually learns. Foot traffic is not loyalty. Presence is not purchase. And 55 million visits to a building where the most popular attractions are free tells you something specific about who is coming, and something equally specific about why. The corridor is lit, the storefront is dark, and somewhere in that gap between the light and the darkness is the question that the annual report does not ask. What is a mall for when the shopping stops? If you have visited Dubai Mall in the last 2 years and noticed something that the brochure did not prepare you for, tell us in the comments what you actually found when you got there.